Hello and welcome everyone. This is Sabrina Paganoni and I'm here connecting with you from the HEALEY Center with Dr. Cudkowicz and our patient navigation team, Alison Bullat and Catherine Small. So I'm giving everyone a few seconds to join from the waiting room and then we can get started. This is our weekly update. And maybe if we can go to the next slide. We can see that, really the focus right now is on adding, the new regimen E, trialos. So we're very excited. We started enrolling in 4 regimens, as you know, a few months ago. Those have completed enrollment, and now we are beginning to the preparations for regimen E, the 5th regimen. So if you can go to the next slide, I just want to let you know where the trial will be enrolling. As you may remember, for those of you who have been following us for a while, we started the network with 52 sites. Those are the ones that were initially activated. Then we added 2 more sites, next slide, for regimen D, for a total of 54. And after that, if you can go to the next slide, you can see that we have another 20 to be added. So again, we continue to grow in terms of geographic presence. And in terms of regimen E, we are activating them, on a rolling basis, basically. So if you can go to the next slide, you can see the ones that are currently activated for regimen E. So essentially, as sites join, we need to activate them for whatever regimen is enrolling. And so at this time, we have 12 that have been activated for regimen E. And those 12 include a mix of original sites, the ones that were part of the initial group, as well as new sites, the ones that have been added to the network at a later time. So we're very excited to obviously continue to work with the original sites, as well as add new sites. And just for today, just wanted to thank, especially everyone who's been working at the different sites, in the 12 sites that were first to be activated for regimen E. And it's great to also welcome new sites. Again, of these 12 that were activated, 3 of them actually didn't participate in the original few regimens, specifically Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, Virginia Commonwealth in Virginia, and St. Alphonsus in Idaho, which is exactly where we're adding a new state thanks to these new sites. So again, it's a mix of green and blue sites in terms of old and new, and we want to continue to expand to new geographies. The other sites, the ones that were originally part of the network or the other ones, are also undergoing activation for regimen E. So again, these are just the first 12 that were activated, but we continue to add so that regimen E can enroll elsewhere as well. So if you can go to the next slide, this is really dynamic. We continue to add sites. This is the list of sites that are closest to activation based on their training materials and activation procedures, but the other ones will be included as well. So again, we got basically go in batches and we will continue to add. Next slide. If you want to see, to monitor kind of the status of the different sites, we do have a website, and you can see the link to that, as well as a QR code that will bring you directly there. So again, we have now a large network, as I just explained. All sites are active in terms of, being active in the network. Some are active only on A, B, C, and D, and others are already active on E, the 5th regimen. So depending on that, you'll see the enrollment status will be described on the website as either active but not recruiting for E, because the other regimens have already completed enrollments. And then as they are activated for regimen E or the 5th regimen, their status will be changed to recruiting. So for example, Lehigh Valley is now recruiting for E. Next slide. And if you have any questions, I know this is a lot of information, and for those of you who have been following us on a weekly basis, we kind of summarize things, and many of you have been following us weekly, so all of this is very familiar to you. But if you're new, or even if you're not new and you have other questions, please feel free to contact us, and specifically contact Catherine and Alison, either by phone or email, because if you have any questions, you want to know about the status of your site near you, or you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to them, and then we'll get back to you outside of this webinar as well. These webinars are recorded and posted on the website. The QR code will bring you to the weekly webinar registration. We will continue to keep the community posted as with updates and new events. You can also register for the ALS link, which is our newsletter, and we send send out emails, perhaps roughly on a weekly basis or so. Many of these emails are about our own ALS clinic and center, but we also circulate information and research updates in general. We will continue to have guest speakers. We don't have any guest speaker today, but starting next week, we will restart the list of guest speakers from different sites. Really love to get to know the different sites. And if you're curious about some previous sites, again, all the recordings are available on our website. Different site PIs presented their staff and site. Every site has a little bit of a different flavor and does, things a little bit, like the same for the trial, but really they have their own personality and special features. So feel free to, check their recordings or join our new webinars where we will be talking with our colleagues in Iowa, Kentucky, and Florida. So be sure to attend those. Next slide. And this is really the last slide. We continue to schedule new guest speakers, new topics for upcoming webinars. So we will continue to travel around the US to meet our platform trial site investigators, as I just said. We will continue to invite all the different patient foundations and groups that support the trial. Also, we can't wait to have our scientists from Silos Therapeutics come and present on their drug. We're still submitting their slides, and we will make sure that as soon as they are approved by our IRB, which is the group that oversees all the communications and all the kind of materials that we put out in public. As soon as the slides are approved, we will have them on this webinar. And we're also looking for new topics. We know many of you have submitted questions about EAPS, biostats, and science in general. And please send us your questions, ideas, and we'll be sure to schedule webinars as needed. So with that, I think we can stop sharing the slides and start the best part of these weekly webinars, which is really when we take your questions. And so, Dr. Cudkowicz, I'll ask you a few questions. Actually, can you tell us more about what we mean by shared placebo? We talk a lot about shared placebo in this trial. What's special about it?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. So in a traditional trial, and not in a platform trial, but a traditional trial, let's say 2/3 of the people in the trial will get the active drug and 1/3 get placebo. And at the end of the study, the data is done and it's used for that one drug, and the data from the placebo group is not used for any other drugs. In the platform trial, it's completely different. We share the data from people assigned from placebo in each of those different regimens. So you saw Dr. Paganoni show you that slide with 5 different drugs. In each of those, 25% of people are on placebo. And we use the data from each of the 25% for each drug, and we pull it together so that we can compare it to each drug. And that by doing that, we save in a lot of ways. One, we save time and we save funds. And most importantly, we really increase the chance for people with ALS to be on active drug. And we can keep using those placebo data for future regimens as long as the natural history, until the natural history of the illness changes. So for example, we're using all the data from the people in placebo in the first 5 regimens. We're using them for each of those 5 drugs. So it's super efficient. And of course, we hope to get that ratio even lower than 25% over time.
Great. So a question about shared placebo to conclude the sort of topic. So some people are on active and some people are on placebo. When will participants know if they got active drug or placebo?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And every company does it a little differently. What we'd like to do for the platform trial is share that as soon as we possibly can. And that means that after the results of the trial are over for that particular drug. So that means the last person finishes the last visit day, the data is cleaned, it's locked, and it's analyzed. So we know the results, and then we tell people what they were on.
Yeah. Another question about placebo, kind of to go on that theme. Do animal studies have placebo?
Yeah, they do. That's a really good question. So there are different animal models of motor neuron disease in mice and fish and worms, and even in cells. And when you test drugs in those models, you always have a group that's on the active drug and the group that's on the placebo, and that's how you tell if you're drug changes the illness in those models and what it does to the biology.
Great. So as we discussed, we have a placebo-controlled period and then an open label extension after that. So can you tell us more about the importance of the open label extension, and is the data from the open label extension used to be added to the final results?
Yes, the open label extension data is important for so many reasons. And one of them is that it's really important for telling the long-term effects of the drug, long-term safety, and can be used to help with a faster FDA approval if the drug is positive. We do it for many reasons. And one of the most important is because we think it's the right thing to do for people who are part of research and who go through the double-blind period, are helping us in the field develop new drugs, that they also have a period of time when they have access to the drug. I'll say that the study that Dr. Paganoni led with Amylyx is probably the best example of the power of the open label extension. So in that study, after the 6-month double-blind period, everybody could go on the active drug and open label extension, and were followed for quite a long time. And that data was used to show the impact of starting the treatment earlier, the long-term effects of it, and were used really in this upcoming FDA submission for approval of that drug. And we've designed the platform trial in the same way that data could be used to accelerate FDA approval for any of the drugs that are positive.
Great. So there's a few questions about timelines. So perhaps I will group them together and you can walk us through that. So the questions are basically when we will have results, and maybe we can break it down, for kind of the first 4 regimens for the open, the placebo-controlled trial, and then the open label extension. And if you can tell us more about the timelines for regimen E as well.
Sure. Yeah. So we will have the results of the first 4 regimens this summer. We'll have the results of the first 3 a little earlier than the 4th one. And we can, I think at a past meeting, we might have given some of the ranges of the dates, but we're thinking around July, August. It depends a little bit on the experience of the last person in the study of each of the regimens, whether they go into open label extension or not. That's why it's not a precise date, but it's around the summer for the first 4. Regimen E, just started, and we are actually hoping that it enrolls relatively fast as we get more and more centers up, because the faster it enrolls, the faster we'll have the results for that one. But I'm anticipating probably end of the year or early 2023, really depending on the enrollment rate for regimen 5.
Great. In terms of participation, there's a couple of questions about people who live in Puerto Rico, are Puerto Rican citizens. Can they participate in the trial?
I think if you can get to a center that and reliably come back for the visits, you could be in the trial. We really should open the site in Puerto Rico. I know there are some really good neurologists there who are part of our NEALS network, and that might be the easiest future option. But in the meantime, I think people would need to talk to maybe people in Florida or some in a site close where you could go to reliably.
There's a few questions that are coming in about the new drugs. So as people know, the FDA is making decisions about oral edaravone as well as AMX 35. So can you tell us more about these drugs, and will they be allowed in the trial, either in the placebo-controlled trial or in the open label?
Yeah. First of all, just want to say how exciting it is to have 2 drugs under FDA review for approval 1 month apart. And I hope this becomes the norm for every year. We have a few drugs under review for FDA approval. So one of them, as Sabrina mentioned, is oral edaravone. And for this one, the company had to show that the oral version had equivalent blood levels and safety profile to the IV. And so to get that approval, and that decision is expected, I think, May 12th. And then the Amylyx AMX 035 is a study that Sabrina led that showed slowing of the illness, and that review is expected by the end of June 29th. So we haven't made any final decisions about what to do in the platform trial, but we are talking to our patient advisory group as well as our steering committees and the regimen partners. For sure, we would, if they got approved and were available by prescription, have people in the open label extension to take them. What we haven't decided yet is in people in regimen E or the CELOS what the impact of people taking those two drugs on the ability to tell if that drug worked or not. So that's what we're talking very closely to our patient advisory group about, whether it would be reasonable or not to ask people perhaps who are have 1 month left in regimen E to wait that 1 month so that it wouldn't impact the data. Anyway, we'll have some answers, I think, in the next month or two. But it's a complex problem, but it's a good problem to have.
Right. There's a clarification question about the comment about Puerto Rico. Do you know any neurologists related to the trial in Puerto Rico?
We do not have right now a trial site in Puerto Rico, but we do have a NEAL site. And I'm blanking on the name of the doctor at the NEAL site.
Dr. Delis.
That.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Delis.
Yeah. And I don't think they applied to be part of it, but we could certainly reach out. We're very open if a center is willing to be part of the center, part of the HEALEY platform trial. We have stuck to US, United States for the moment, though eventually we might go to Canada or other countries, but we'd be happy to work with them.
Yeah, there's general questions about the future. So how many additional regimens do you anticipate in the next couple of years? And will there be also an expanded access for any of these regimens?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we would love to have at least 3 running at any one time, or even more if they're good drugs. And we are in discussions with many pharma companies about joining the platform trial. So that and that we would keep going until we find really effective treatments, and we would start doing combinations and adapting along the way. That's the real beauty of this platform trial approach. I forgot what the second question was.
The other question is about EAPs, and there's actually a couple of other questions about EAPs. So do you expect these new regimens to have EAPs?
Yes, that's our expectation. We do ask each of the regimen partners for that, and most of them are very willing. For some of them that might not be able to, but we definitely ask for that. Now, these are all drugs that have great science. We know the right dose based on their earlier studies, but this is the first efficacy study for them. And for that reason, most of the EAPs are relatively small. So for example, the one we're doing with regimen D is 24 participants. The one we did with regimen B is 35. It's not the hundreds. I think you can't really do the very large EAPs until you have positive phase 2 data. So when you're more in the later stage of drug development. But we're definitely asking all of them, and I think they're largely willing. We haven't gotten a lot of no's.
Yeah, and again on the topic of expanded access, somebody asked, what's kind of the strategy to get a drug available to expanded access? Do you ask investigational? Do you ask the companies that make the investigational drug, or do you connect with sites first? Can you tell us more how EAPs are set up?
Sure. Very first question is to the companies, because if they don't agree to it, it doesn't happen. They have to agree to provide the drug, to provide access to their FDA files, and they have to have the drug. For example, some companies will be very willing, but they put in their orders for making drug a year before we actually started the platform trial, and they only have enough for the platform trial. So we're trying to get that request out much earlier to companies, even before they've even applied to be part of the platform trial. And I know a lot of people with ALS are doing the same thing. So that's the first step, is the company has to agree. And then we asked our sites, which of our sites are interested in being EAP sites, and the majority are. And so then we really tried to spread it out geographically, so that, our long-term goal is every center in the platform trials offering EAP to people not eligible for trials.
Yeah. In terms of the results, so as you discussed, we'll have results for multiple drugs in 2022. So let's say that one of the drugs is more successful than others. Will participants in the other regimens be switched to that drug?
Yeah, it's a really good question. That is, again, the goal of these platform trials, so that as you find effective drugs, that you then start to build combinations. But you have to make sure that it's safe to do, that adding the 2 drugs together doesn't in some way change the biology of those drugs, so that the effective one isn't effective anymore. And then you have to make sure it's safe. But that is the plan.
Great.
And the other plan again would be, let's say oral edaravone and AMX035 come on the market, that the regimens that we start after they come on the market, all those drugs would be allowed, so that we in effect would have a combination already of riluzole or oral edaravone, AMX035, and the new drug.
Right. So switching gears and talking about, so we assess the drug's efficacy based on the ALS-FRSR, which is a questionnaire, which is the most commonly used outcome measure for ALS. So the first question is, how reliable is the ALS-FRSR?
I actually think it's a pretty good outcome measure. I know there's debate about that in the field, but done well with good training and within enough participants, you can find out if a drug slows the illness or not. And obviously we saw that with both the IV edaravone and the AMX035. Could we develop better outcome measures? I hope so. I think there's a big need for outcome measures that perhaps can tell if a drug works in a shorter time. Like we know with ALS-FRS, we need at least 6 months. Wouldn't it be awesome to have an outcome measure that you could tell in 2 months if it was going to work? And there's a lot of people working on that. But at the moment, it's one of our best ones. But in the platform trial, we augment it with other ones. We're measuring strength, measuring breathing, measuring voice, and fluid biomarkers as well.
Okay. So I think somebody said this question was not answered. Can you let me know? Okay, so the question was, once the results are in, will participants in all regimens be eligible to receive the most successful drug?
Oh, yes, you're right. I forgot to answer that. I'm sorry. I think what we would do in that situation is, again, we'd have to talk to the company, and depending on their drug supply, to see whether they would be open to an expanded access program, again, for people interested in taking their drug. But for example, we would not, let's say somebody's in the open label for regimen B, and we find out regimen C is positive. We wouldn't be able to the next day switch everybody to regimen C. What we would do, though, is have that conversation with the company and what that would look like, and try to do our best to make that happen.
Yeah. So there's a question again about sort of medications given in Puerto Rico. So I think it's we can generalize that. So if people are given Radicava as part of their ALS treatment by their own physician, can they participate in the platform trial?
Yes, absolutely. So any marketed approved drug for FDA is allowed in the platform trial. So riluzole and IV edaravone and Dexta, those are all FDA approved drugs for people with ALS, and they're allowed.
So there's another question about placebo. This is more statistical. I'll try to, I want to make sure I understand it, but I'll try to paraphrase. I believe that the question is, if a trial is placebo controlled and the results show that both the placebo and the active drug result in an improvement in the ALS-FRSR in the questionnaire, what does that mean? Does that mean that the drug is effective or not effective? If both placebo and active result in an improvement in the ALS-FRSR? I believe that's the question.
I think that would be a highly unusual thing to happen. And it would make us wonder if there was an issue with the placebo. If you saw both groups getting better, I think we'd have to go deep dive into why that happened, because we would expect, again, that the group people on the placebo would progress as typically happen with people with ALS. Yeah,
and we'll be sure to ask this question again to Dr. Chibnik when she comes here. So I think we can maybe make some diagrams and see, if that makes, if to have some diagrams to show how that would work. We have taken most of the questions. I just want to go to a more general question, not about the trial specifically, but it's a great question about recent articles about the relationship between TDP-43 and ANC13A. So perhaps you can comment on sort of these topics. And also the specific question is there a genetic test for ANC13A?
So there is a genetic test for ANC13A that you can get by talking to your neurologist. It can be ordered through, I think, Invitae or Prevention or both. and is part of what you can find out. It's a really important gene, like I would say a risk factor gene or a risk modifier gene. So alone, it might not cause ALS, but if one has a change in this gene, it can change the course. And there's certain versions of it that make the course faster versus slower. And there have been some recent really important papers linking it, as you mentioned, to TDP-43, which is the protein that in people with ALS is one of the proteins that aggregated and in the wrong place, and we think is an important cause of the motor neuron injury.
Great, thank you. I think we covered all the questions that were asked today. So I wanted to thank everyone again for joining, and we'll be sure to be here next week.
Great to see everybody and great questions. Have a great week.
Thank you so much.